Redditor 1. I've never told anyone this before, but I grew up in a town in the Arctic where winter's endless nights were both a wonder and a warning. I remember countless clear evenings when the sky was a canvas of shifting, otherworldly lights, a spectacle that, over time, became as routine as the biting cold on my cheeks. I spent many nights alone, driving my parents' old snowmobile a few kilometers out of town, searching for that perfect spot where the darkness wasn't broken by any stray glimmer from civilization. It was in those moments, lying on the hard, frozen snow and gazing up at the heavens, that I felt both small and infinitely connected to something vast and unknowable. That particular night, I had left home around 11 p.m., eager for a taste of solitude under the endless expanse of stars. The engine's low hum and the crunch of compacted snow beneath my tires were my only companions as I navigated the winding hills. I knew every ridge and dip of the landscape, every patch of frost that glimmered like shards of crystal in the moonlight. It was a familiar journey, a ritual that had soothed my restless mind many times before. I parked the machine in a clearing far from any town lights, its presence marked only by the soft, mechanical vibration settling into the silence. As I shut off the engine and settled into the biting cold, I pulled my coat tighter around me and lay back on the snow. The sky above was a familiar mix of distant stars, drifting satellites, and the occasional flash of the northern lights. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the chill seep into my bones, feeling that paradoxical warmth that comes from being utterly alone under the cosmos. For a while, everything was as it always had been, calm. Then I began to notice a subtle sound, a soft, persistent clicking, not unlike the sound of a pen tapping rhythmically on a desk. At first, I convinced myself it was simply the snowmobile's engine cooling down, its metal parts contracting in the frigid air. But the noise wasn't coming from the direction of the machine. It was as if it were emanating from somewhere above, high in the vault of the sky. I sat up, my heart beginning to race as I scanned the darkness. My eyes traced the familiar outlines of constellations and drifting clouds of aurora, trying to pinpoint the origin of the sound. There was no animal stirring, at least nothing that could produce such a mechanically precise rhythm. It was too regular, too deliberate, as though someone or something was methodically tapping out a code in the silence of the night. Determined to understand, I focused my gaze upward. The stars twinkled indifferently as always, and a lone satellite crossed the field of view, a benign reminder of human ingenuity. But then I saw them, 3 unnervingly bright points of light embedded within the shimmering folds of the northern lights. At first, I mistook them for nothing more than distant stars, perfectly aligned by chance. However, as I watched, they began to intensify, their brightness pulsing slowly in time with the clicking sound that was growing ever louder in my ears. My pulse quickened. I felt a strange mixture of fascination and dread as I continued to stare. The 3 points remained isolated, each one distinct against the auroral glow, yet they pulsed in unison, as though connected by an unseen force. The sound overhead, click, 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 became more insistent, as if mocking the silence that should have reigned in this isolated wilderness. Every tap reverberated in my skull, amplifying the chill that had nothing to do with the Arctic air. I tried to rationalize what I was experiencing. Could it be some bizarre atmospheric phenomenon? A quirk of the magnetic fields that I'd read about in old scientific journals? Or perhaps it was a trick of my overactive imagination, spurred on by too many solitary nights under a star-flecked sky. I remembered my childhood, when the lights were a source of wonder, not fear. But now, as the mechanical clicking escalated into a clattering crescendo that echoed around me, I felt the boundaries between reality and something far more sinister begin to blur. The lights then vanished as abruptly as they had appeared. One moment, the sky had been alive with those 3 glaring points, and the next, they were gone, leaving behind only the endless tapestry of ordinary stars. The clicking sound stopped just as suddenly, plunging me back into a silence that felt oppressive and heavy. I sat there for several agonizing moments, shivering in the cold, my mind racing to piece together what I had witnessed. Had I imagined it all? Had my senses betrayed me in the quiet loneliness of the Arctic night? After what felt like an eternity, I reluctantly climbed back onto the snowmobile. The engine sputtered hesitantly, as if reluctant to awaken from a deep slumber, and I could sense a mechanical stiffness that wasn't there before. My fingers trembled on the throttle, and as the machine roared to life, I felt a creeping sensation that I was leaving behind more than just a clearing in the snow. I drove back toward town, my thoughts a jumble of plausible explanations. Perhaps a stray helicopter from the nearby mine had caused an odd interference, or maybe the lights were just a rare, unexplained quirk of the aurora. I clung to these mundane possibilities like lifelines, even as a more unsettling notion began to gnaw at me. What if something beyond our understanding had made contact? When I finally pulled up to my house, I noticed immediately that something was off. The lights were dark. It was not yet late enough for the entire household to be asleep, especially with my parents known for staying up late grading papers or watching television. I moved cautiously, my steps echoing in the quiet hall as I removed my winter gear and slipped inside. The silence within the house was thick, unnerving in its absolute absence of the usual nighttime hum of domestic life. My mind raced with questions, but I told myself to stay calm. After all, I'd only been gone a short while, almost an hour, maybe less. I crept upstairs and tucked myself under the covers, determined to remain unnoticed. I set my alarm for the next day, though sleep eluded me. Lying there, I tried to piece together the dissonant events of the night. The engine had been sluggish, the air colder than expected, and now the oppressive silence of my home only deepened the unease that had taken root inside me. Then, in the dim light of early morning, I noticed something I hadn't before. Faint, intermittent clicking lights flickered at the window, a mirror of the sound that had haunted me under the open sky. I sat up, my breath catching in my throat as I stared at those tiny illuminations dancing across the glass. They weren't coming from any external source I could identify. They appeared to be a part of the very fabric of the night itself, as though the darkness had sprouted its own eerie life. For nearly 7 hours, I sat transfixed, unable to tear my eyes away from that inexplicable display. Each flash of light brought with it a resurgence of the memory of those 3 bright points in the sky, and the rhythmic tapping seemed to echo the beat of my own rapidly pounding heart. I tried to convince myself that exhaustion or a trick of the light was to blame, but deep down, I knew that something had shifted that night, something that defied logic and defied explanation. The hours crawled by, and the early hints of dawn began to push back the night. Still, the clicking persisted, a subtle, relentless reminder of the mystery that had unfolded out on the frozen wastes. I finally managed to force myself into a restless slumber, but the images of that night haunted my dreams. In those dreams, the 3 lights reappeared over and over, each time accompanied by that relentless, mechanical rhythm that seemed to pulse with an otherworldly life. When morning finally broke and I awoke, I was left with more questions than answers. I never did find out what those lights were, or what produced the clicking sound. In the years that followed, I abandoned my midnight snowmobile rides, content to leave that mystery as a dark, unsettling memory. Yet every so often, on a cold, clear night when the stars shine with an uncanny brilliance, I catch a glimpse of something peculiar out the window. A brief flash of light or the faintest echo of that clicking noise. And I wonder if I was lucky enough to survive a brush with something not of this world, or if I had simply been marked by an encounter that I was never meant to understand. Small break. A lot of you watch my channel but haven't subscribed yet. Please subscribe, like, and help me grow. Redditor 2. I've never told anyone this before, but growing up in the Arctic taught me to find solace in the cold, endless nights and the dancing lights overhead. I spent countless hours beneath a ceiling of stars, marveling at the northern lights as they stretched across the sky like shimmering curtains. It was a world where every clear night promised a unique display, a fleeting glimpse of the universe's mysteries, even if, to an untrained eye, those wonders might seem all too ordinary. One night, driven by a mix of youthful rebellion and a scientist's insatiable curiosity, I borrowed my parents' snowmobile without asking. The biting wind whipped at my face as I sped a few kilometers out of town, the engine's growl blending with the crunch of snow under the tires. I headed for a ridge, far from the intrusive glow of streetlights, a place where the Arctic's natural splendor could be appreciated in solitude. Once there, I shut off the machine and sprawled onto the pristine snow, eyes fixed on the celestial canvas above. At first it was the usual spectacle: distant stars, the graceful sweep of the aurora, and the occasional flash of a satellite crossing silently overhead. I let my thoughts drift, contemplating the vastness of space and the possibility that, as a friendly scientist would argue, a UFO is merely an unidentified flying object until proven otherwise. After all, with enough training, even the most anomalous sight becomes just another celestial body, a trick of light, a stray reflection. Yet that night, as I lay there in the freezing silence, something unusual stirred. A soft clicking noise began to punctuate the calm. At first, I assumed it was simply the sound of the snowmobile's engine cooling, a normal creak and groan in the cold. But the sound came not from the dormant machine beside me, but from somewhere above. It was too regular, too mechanical, like the rhythmic tapping of a metronome echoing across the ice. My heart quickened as I lifted my eyes from the familiar constellations, scanning the heavens for the source. That's when I saw them. 3 distinct points of light, embedded within the wavering folds of the northern lights. They glowed steadily, growing brighter with each passing moment, their luminosity punctuating the darkness with an almost deliberate precision. The clicking grew louder, syncing with the pulsations of the lights, as if the two phenomena were intertwined in a secret, cosmic dialogue. I felt both mesmerized and deeply unsettled, caught in a moment where scientific curiosity warred with a creeping, primal fear. I tried to rationalize the event. Perhaps it was an experimental satellite or an unexplained quirk of magnetic interference, a phenomenon I'd read about in obscure astrophysics journals. But nothing I knew could account for the perfectly regular cadence of those clicks, nor for the unearthly intensity of those 3 points. My rational mind struggled to assert that it was simply another unidentified object in the sky, yet the experience defied any neat scientific categorization. As abruptly as the lights had intensified, they vanished. The clicking ceased, leaving me in an oppressive silence that pressed in on me like the weight of the Arctic night itself. I sat there, shivering not only from the cold, but from the overwhelming sensation that I had glimpsed something not meant for human eyes. With trembling fingers, I restarted the snowmobile. The engine sputtered to life with unusual reluctance, as if disturbed by the encounter, and I raced back to town, my mind whirling with theories, each more unsettling than the last. When I pulled up to my house, the familiar warmth and light were conspicuously absent. The windows were dark, the usual hum of late-night activity replaced by a silence so complete it bordered on eerie. I slipped inside quietly, shedding my winter gear with a mounting sense of dread. My parents, usually awake and engaged in their nightly routines, were nowhere to be found. The silence in the house was as oppressive as the one in the wilderness, and I could feel my heart pounding in the stillness. I managed to crawl into bed and set my alarm for the morning, though sleep proved elusive. Every so often I would glance at the window and see tiny, intermittent lights clicking in a pattern that mirrored the sound I had heard earlier. For nearly 7 hours, those lights danced in the periphery of my vision, a constant, unsettling reminder that the mystery was far from resolved. As a scientist, I had always maintained that eyewitness accounts and blurry photographs could never serve as solid proof. After all, in an age where images can be doctored and memories fallible, definitive evidence is as elusive as the truth behind the unidentified. Yet nothing in textbooks or lectures could have prepared me for this personal, intimate encounter with the inexplicable. Around the early hours, just as the gray light of dawn began to seep into the sky, the atmosphere in my room shifted. The clicking lights outside my window seemed to intensify, their cadence syncing with the beating of my heart. A disconcerting hum filled the air, a sound that vibrated deep within me, stirring a sense of being watched by something not of this world. I tried to tell myself it was all in my head, that my overactive imagination was conjuring phantoms in the dark. But the precision of the clicking, the deliberate pattern of the lights made it impossible to dismiss as mere trickery of the mind. In that fragile moment between sleep and wakefulness, I felt a presence, a subtle yet undeniable force that seemed to permeate the very air around me. I could almost sense a gentle, almost friendly murmur, as though the universe itself were trying to communicate. The word contact echoed softly, repeated in a cadence that was both inviting and terrifying. Before I could process what was happening, I felt a sudden, inexplicable pull. It was as if an unseen force had reached through the darkness and lifted me from my bed. I found myself suspended in a weightless void, enveloped in a soft, bluish glow. The sensation was at once disorienting and surreal, as if my body had become one with the icy air. Before I could react, I was standing, though not entirely on solid ground, in front of an object that defied all explanation. Hovering silently above the snow, the craft was unlike any vehicle I had ever seen. Its surface shimmered with alien symbols, and the structure pulsed with a rhythm that matched the clicking still resonating in my ears. Instinctively, I reached out and clutched a dusty, forgotten relic from a shelf, a small, leather-bound book that had long since lost its luster. In that surreal moment, I realized that if I were to be abducted by an alien, as the friendly quips of fellow scientists sometimes joked, I'd at least have something tangible to remind me of the encounter. The interior of the craft was a labyrinth of light and shadow, filled with forms that defied description. Despite the terror that surged through me, a part of my mind, a part that had always believed in the possibility of intelligent life beyond our planet, marveled at the raw, unfathomable beauty of it all. Time lost all meaning as I floated there, subjected to sensations that defied logic. I saw fragments of distant galaxies, felt the whisper of cosmic winds, and experienced an overwhelming sense of interconnectedness with the universe. Just as suddenly as it had begun, the experience ended. I was deposited back in my room, lying beneath the covers, the early morning light casting long shadows across the floor. The echoes of that alien presence lingered, haunting me with the certainty that I had been forever changed. In the days that followed, I meticulously documented every detail of that night. The erratic engine of the snowmobile, the rhythmic clicking, the uncanny lights outside my window, and the inexplicable sensation of being lifted from my bed. Yet every photograph I attempted to take turned out blurred, as if the craft's influence had rendered my camera useless. My notes became a blend of scientific inquiry and raw, unfiltered fear. I had always held that a UFO was merely an unidentified object until properly observed, but now I was forced to confront the terrifying possibility that the universe harbored secrets beyond our comprehension. Every time I venture out into the stark beauty of the Arctic night, I feel the weight of that encounter pressing upon me. The once comforting glow of the northern lights now serves as a chilling reminder that we are not alone, that something out there watches and waits. I live with the knowledge that the cosmos is far too vast and nutrient-rich for us to be the sole bearers of intelligence and life. And while I cling to the rational explanations I was taught, I cannot shake the feeling that I've been marked by a presence that defies scientific reasoning, a presence that, on some distant night, may come calling again. I continue my work as a scientist, ever curious, ever searching for answers. Yet, every time I peer into the night sky, I am reminded of that cold, clicking rhythm, a rhythm that whispers of contact from beyond. And perhaps, one day, I will find a way to capture that moment on film, to prove that the universe is not just a silent expanse of stars, but a living, breathing entity filled with mysteries waiting to be unraveled. Until then, I live with the profound knowledge that my place in the cosmos is forever altered, and that the truth about what lies beyond is both wondrous and horrifying. Redditor 3. I've never forgotten that day in high school, the day when even the unflappable among us showed cracks in their armor. I was sitting in the back of the nearly empty chemistry classroom when Marcus, normally the stoic, no-nonsense guy who never once lost his cool, burst through the door, tears streaking his face. His hands trembled as he clutched his books against his chest, and his voice, usually so steady and commanding, quivered as he pleaded for someone to listen. "Man, I was abducted," he stammered, barely able to meet my eyes. I could hardly believe what I was hearing. Marcus, who had always laughed off every wild rumor and was known for his unfaltering bravado, now looked utterly defeated, his words raw and desperate. After class, we huddled together in the deserted hallway, where his story unfolded in halting fragments. He described lying in his bed in the dead of night when a crushing paralysis had taken hold. "It wasn't just sleep," he whispered, voice low as if afraid the walls might be listening. "I couldn't move, couldn't scream. And then I saw them. I saw eyes, hundreds of them, in this light, this blinding light that made me feel like I was being pulled apart. Marcus's eyes darted around the dim corridor, as if expecting the source of his terror to materialize behind the lockers. Every word he spoke was punctuated by ragged breaths, and I could sense a darkness behind his tale, something that wasn't entirely fabricated by a mind running on adrenaline. Even as a rational person, a budding scientist with an appetite for facts and evidence, I felt a chill prickling my skin as he described a presence hovering over him. A presence that seemed both alien and intimately close, as though it had reached into his soul. He told me about the sensation of being pinned down, a crushing weight in the middle of his chest, and the cold, metallic sound that echoed in his ears. It was like someone was tapping on my brain, he said. Every beat of that tap made me feel like I was losing bits of myself. Marcus's voice cracked as he recalled that moment, and I could see the terror etched into every line of his face. For days after that incident, whispers swirled around our school. Some of the tougher kids snickered behind closed doors, mocking what they assumed was just another outlandish story. But not me. I was drawn to the mystery of it all, the question of whether Marcus's account was merely a figment of sleep-deprived imagination, or if something far more sinister had brushed against our reality. I began to pore over books about sleep paralysis and hallucinations, desperate to find an explanation that could reconcile Marcus's uncharacteristic terror with his otherwise unshakable demeanor. Late one night, I found myself in my room with a stack of texts and research papers spread out before me. The hum of the overhead light and the whisper of the wind outside mingled into a lullaby of ordinary sounds. Yet my mind was restless. I recalled Marcus's description, the heavy weight on his chest, the tapping that resonated like a slow, deliberate Morse code. And I wondered if these were the same sensations documented in cases of sleep paralysis. The more I read, the more I began to see a pattern. Sleep paralysis was notorious for its vivid hallucinations, for turning a quiet night into a stage for nightmares. Yet something about Marcus's account felt too precise, too deliberate, as if his mind had painted the scene with colors of fear and cosmic dread. In the following weeks, Marcus slowly recovered his usual self, his tough guy reputation gradually reasserting itself as he dismissed the episode with a forced laugh and a shrug. "Just sleep paralysis, man," he'd say, though his eyes betrayed a lingering unease. Even as he tried to move past it, I could sense that the experience had left an indelible mark on him, a reminder that sometimes our minds can create horrors that feel as real as any physical danger. I couldn't help but wonder, if our brains were capable of conjuring such vivid terror in the dead of night, what other unseen forces might be lurking in the corners of our perceptions? My nights grew restless as I replayed Marcus's story in my head. Every creak in my old house, every rustle of the wind against the window, seemed charged with the possibility of an alien presence, a reminder that the boundary between reality and nightmare is thinner than we dare to admit. One chilly autumn evening, as I sat alone in my room, trying to concentrate on my science homework, I began to feel the familiar prickle of unease. The clock ticked monotonously, its sound amplified in the quiet of my small apartment, and shadows danced on the walls in a way that made my heart race. I recalled the feeling of Marcus's paralyzed terror, the sensation of an unseen force hovering just out of reach. I tried to shake the memory away, focusing instead on the equations in front of me, but the anxiety clung stubbornly, refusing to dissipate. It was then that I heard a soft tapping outside my window, a rhythmic, deliberate sound that instantly transported me back to Marcus's harrowing description. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The tapping was gentle, yet insistent, like a warning or a signal. My rational mind fought to assert that it was nothing more than a branch rubbing against the pane, yet a deeper, instinctual fear whispered that something was terribly off. With trembling hands, I approached the window and peered out into the darkness. The street lamp cast long, distorted shadows on the pavement, and for a moment I thought I saw a pair of eyes glimmering in the gloom, but as quickly as they appeared, they were gone, swallowed by the shifting interplay of light and dark. I told myself it was just a trick of the light, a hallucination born of too many late nights and too much stress, yet the memory of Marcus's terror and the inexplicable tapping haunted me, a reminder that even the most rational minds can be undermined by the unknown. In the days that followed, I found myself glancing over my shoulder more often than usual. The corridors of our high school, once filled with the easy camaraderie of youth, now seemed charged with an unspoken menace. Every shadow, every unexplained noise, took on a sinister quality. Marcus tried to laugh it off, insisting that his experience was nothing more than a bizarre anomaly, a freak occurrence that could be explained away by the brain's quirks. But even he could not completely shake the memory of that night, nor the lingering question of whether there might be some grain of truth hidden within his hallucinations. I began to document my own experiences, small, seemingly insignificant moments of dread that punctuated my everyday life. I kept a journal of every unsettling noise, every flicker of movement in the peripheral vision. My entries grew increasingly detailed, a blend of scientific observation and raw, unfiltered fear. I described the way the shadows seemed to breathe in the dark, the way the tapping noise outside my window morphed into an almost imperceptible whisper that echoed through the halls of my mind. One particularly bitter night, as the wind howled outside and the world was cloaked in a heavy blanket of inky darkness, I sat at my desk under the dim glow of a single desk lamp. The silence was profound, broken only by the rhythmic tick-tock of the clock and the occasional creak of my old apartment. I couldn't help but wonder if Marcus's experience was a harbinger of something more sinister, if our minds, so adept at fabricating horrors, might one day reveal a truth that is far more terrifying than mere sleep paralysis. Perhaps it was foolish to allow my imagination to wander down such dark corridors. Yet I couldn't ignore the subtle interplay of fear and fascination that had taken root in my heart. I was a scientist at heart, always seeking to uncover the truth, yet I was equally aware that some mysteries might be best left unexplored. As I scribbled down my thoughts, I couldn't help but recall Marcus's desperate plea, his tearful confession that had so shattered his unflinching persona. It served as a stark reminder that even the bravest among us can be rendered helpless in the face of the unknown. Years have passed since those high school days, but the memory of Marcus's encounter remains etched in my mind like a ghost of a long-forgotten nightmare. I have since come to understand that our brains are capable of conjuring terrifying illusions, that the line between reality and hallucination is perilously thin. Yet, despite the cold logic of science, I cannot entirely dismiss the lingering sense of dread that accompanies the night. Every so often, when I catch a glimpse of a shadow moving in the dark or hear a soft tapping in the silence, I remember Marcus's tears and the fear that overtook him, a fear that even the most unyielding soul can succumb to when confronted with the unfathomable. In the end, whether it was a genuine brush with something otherworldly or merely the cruel trick of a sleep-deprived mind, the experience changed us all. It taught me that the universe is vast and mysterious, and that sometimes the real horror lies not in what is out there, but in the hidden recesses of our own minds. Redditor 4. I've never been one to shy away from the unknown, and living in rural Maine has given me a front-row seat to the unexplained. The nights here are long, the dark sky an endless canvas for secrets. Over the years, I've seen more UFOs than I can count, fleeting shapes streaking across the horizon, glowing orbs that hover in silence, and patterns of light that defy conventional explanation. But it's not just me. A surprising number of my neighbors have shared their own eerie experiences with me. I remember one crisp autumn evening, the kind where the chill in the air makes your breath visible, and every sound seems amplified in the stillness. I had just returned from a late shift at the local mill, driving along a narrow, winding country road bordered by dense woods and open fields. The road was nearly empty, save for the occasional rustle of leaves dancing along the shoulder. As I navigated a sharp bend, something caught my eye. A luminous object, gliding effortlessly against the inky black sky. It wasn't an airplane, nor any conventional craft I'd seen before. The object pulsed with a soft, electric blue glow and left a fleeting trail of sparks in its wake. I pulled over to the side, heart pounding, and sat in my truck for several long minutes, watching it vanish into the darkness as silently as it had appeared. Later that week, I met up with Bill, a longtime friend known for his level-headed nature and no-nonsense attitude. Bill was the sort of guy who never lost his cool, the one who'd scoff at ghost stories and dismiss tall tales with a shake of his head. Yet, when he pulled me aside at the local diner, his eyes were wide with a fear that was completely out of character. He leaned in close, voice barely above a whisper, and told me about the night he'd experienced something he couldn't explain. It was late, past midnight, when even the crickets had gone silent, Bill began, his voice trembling slightly. I was sitting alone in my living room, reading by the light of an old lamp, when I noticed something weird out of the corner of my eye. He paused, swallowing hard. At first it was just a flicker, like a shadow moving too deliberately. Then I saw it. Faces. There were faces pressed against my windows. Not the friendly kind, but twisted, almost mocking faces that stared right in at me. Bill's story sent a chill down my spine. He described how the faces would appear for just a moment before dissolving into the darkness, leaving behind the sound of faint mechanical tapping coming from the woods. It wasn't just the wind rustling the trees, he said. It was like someone, or something, was tapping on the very fabric of reality. I heard it clearly, click, click, click. Repeating over and over, Bill insisted that the noises weren't part of any machinery he knew of, and his trembling hands betrayed a deep-seated terror. I wasn't entirely surprised by Bill's account. Over the years, many folks around here have had strange encounters. At neighborhood gatherings, whispers circulate about inexplicable electrical failures, TVs cutting out mid-show, lights flickering in rhythm with some unseen pulse, and radios bursting into static at the most inopportune moments. Even my own home has had its share of anomalies. One evening, while I was working late into the night, the power flickered and died completely. As I fumbled for a flashlight, I caught a glimpse of something impossible. For a brief moment, the window across the room reflected a figure standing outside, its features obscured by shadows. I blinked, and it was gone, leaving only the echo of a mechanical hum in the silence. I began to keep a journal, scribbling down every unusual occurrence, no matter how small. There were nights when I'd hear a low, persistent hum, as if the very earth was vibrating with a secret language. I'd notice static interference on my radio that wouldn't resolve, even after hours. And sometimes, when I stepped outside to catch a breath of the cool night air, I'd see flickers of light dancing at the edge of my vision, as if inviting me to look up at the sky. One particularly clear night, when the moon hung low and full over the rugged Maine landscape, I decided to take a walk. I needed to clear my head after days filled with these unsettling experiences. Wrapped in my worn leather jacket, I stepped outside and walked down the gravel path that led to a nearby clearing, a spot where I often went to gaze at the stars. The cold was biting, and the silence was almost palpable, broken only by the crunch of my boots on the frost-hardened ground. As I settled onto a fallen log, I looked up. The sky was a deep indigo, punctuated by the twinkling of distant stars. And then I saw it, a series of lights, moving with a deliberate precision that sent a shiver down my spine. They weren't random stars or planets. They moved in a pattern, shifting and pulsing like the beat of an otherworldly heart. For a long moment, I simply stared, mesmerized by the eerie dance above. My mind raced with the possibilities. Were these lights simply a trick of the atmosphere, or something far more inexplicable? In that moment, I felt a deep connection to everything around me, as if the universe was trying to speak directly to me. But with that connection came an overwhelming sense of foreboding. The lights seemed to be calling out, not in a language I could understand, but in a rhythm that resonated with the mechanical tapping I had heard before. The sound was distant, yet insistent, as if echoing from deep within the woods behind me. I rose from the log, my heart pounding, and walked back toward my house. Every step felt heavy with the weight of unseen eyes watching from the darkness. As I approached, the familiar outline of my modest farmhouse appeared under the pale glow of the moon. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone, that something was waiting, hidden among the shadows. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with an inexplicable tension. I switched on the radio, hoping for the comforting crackle of local news or some mundane chatter, but instead the static filled the room, punctuated by occasional bursts of white noise that sounded almost like whispers. I sat at my kitchen table, the events of the night replaying in my mind, wondering if the strange occurrences were connected in a way I couldn't yet grasp. In rural Maine, where isolation is as much a part of life as the towering pines and rugged coastlines, the boundary between the ordinary and the extraordinary is often blurred. Neighbors exchange knowing looks when the topic of unexplained phenomena arises, And while some dismiss the stories as mere figments of an overactive imagination, others know too well that the truth is often stranger than fiction. I've seen many UFOs, witnessed inexplicable lights in the sky, and heard mechanical sounds that defy logical explanation. And each experience leaves me wondering, are these merely anomalies in our modern world, or is something else at work? A presence, perhaps, that has been watching over us long before we even knew what a UFO was. Now, whenever I step outside on a cold, clear night, I remain vigilant, scanning the horizon for any sign of those mysterious lights or the faint, rhythmic tapping echoing through the trees. I know that in this quiet corner of rural Maine, where the mundane often hides the inexplicable, every shadow could be hiding a secret, and every flicker of light might be a message from beyond. And so, I continue to live with the unsettling knowledge that the universe is vast, mysterious, and filled with wonders and terrors that we have yet to understand. Redditor 5. I remember that night in Cajon del Mepo as if it were etched in my very soul. I was 20 then, wild, reckless, and hungry for experiences that defied the mundane. The place, a secluded haven surrounded by towering mountains an hour away from downtown Santiago, was renowned for its strange energy and inexplicable phenomena. Local lore whispered of UFO sightings and mysterious happenings, and I wanted to witness it all firsthand. It was one of those nights when the world seemed to be holding its breath. I had driven out to Baños Morales, a series of mud pools that steamed gently in the cool night air, with my ex. We had decided, on an impulsive dare, to chase the thrill of the unknown, to bathe naked in the warm, bubbling mud at 3 a.m. It was an act of rebellion, a wild, almost ritualistic escape from the constraints of everyday life. I made sure to close the gate behind us, sealing our secret from any unwelcome eyes. I wanted absolute privacy, a guarantee that we were alone in that enchanted place. The pools, heated by some unseen geothermal force, felt almost otherworldly. The mud was soft and strangely invigorating, and as we moved together in our naked abandon, the night around us seemed to pulse with an energy that was both primal and mysterious. The stars overhead shone with an intensity that made the darkness feel both vast and intimate, and the mountains stood as silent guardians of our escapade. In the midst of our laughter and playful banter, a subtle shift in the atmosphere stole my attention. I felt it before I saw it, a prickling sense of being watched. I glanced toward the gate, expecting to see nothing more than the rustle of wind against the metal. But then, emerging from the shadows like a specter out of a half-remembered dream, I saw him. A man, probably in his early 30s, with a broad, quiet presence that contrasted sharply with the wild energy around us. He was standing just outside the boundary we had so carefully sealed, his gaze fixed intently on us. My heart pounded in my chest as I tried to make sense of the impossible. Here we were, wrapped in the safety of our isolation, yet there he was, a stranger whose very presence sent chills down my spine despite the warmth of the mud. I forced myself to remain calm, taking on the role of protector, even though inside I was shaking with a fear I couldn't quite suppress. "Hey, what's up?" I called out softly, my voice barely rising above the gentle sound of the bubbling pools. My ex looked over, her eyes wide and searching, mirroring my own confusion and alarm. The man didn't speak immediately. Instead, he offered us a slow, almost deliberate smile. Then, with a graceful motion, he raised his arm in what seemed like a friendly greeting, a casual wave that felt surreal against the backdrop of our clandestine encounter. For a moment, time itself seemed to hesitate. I was convinced that we must be overreacting, that our minds, fueled by the adrenaline of the night and the isolation of the remote location, were playing tricks on us. After all, Cayo del Mapo was known for its unusual occurrences. Strange lights and inexplicable sounds were part of its legend. Yet the man's expression was oddly serene, his eyes reflecting an understanding that went far beyond any ordinary human encounter. In a soft, almost ethereal tone, he spoke words that still echo in my mind. "Todo bien, ya vi todo lo que quería ver." His voice carried the calm of someone who had witnessed far more than we could imagine, a gentle reassurance mingled with an enigmatic farewell. Before we could react further, his form began to blur, fading into the darkness as if he were never truly there at all. It was as though he had been a mere apparition, a transient visitor from another realm, leaving behind only the lingering echo of his parting words. The sudden disappearance left us frozen, suspended in a moment where time stretched out interminably. The mud around us, the soft sounds of the night, even the distant calls of nocturnal creatures, all fell silent in the wake of that surreal encounter. I looked into my ex's eyes, searching for answers that neither of us could provide. We both knew, without speaking, that something profound and inexplicable had just occurred. In the aftermath, I retraced my steps to the gate, examining it to confirm that it had indeed been locked, that no one could have possibly entered without our knowledge. It was just as I had left it, a simple barrier against the outside world. And yet, the memory of that silent, smiling stranger lingered. How could a man appear so casually in a place so isolated, deliver a message that was as comforting as it was bewildering, and then vanish like mist in the early morning light? Over the following days and years, the incident haunted me with an unyielding persistence. I found myself obsessively replaying every detail of that night, trying to piece together the fragments of memory like a puzzle with missing pieces. I dove into local legends and gathered stories from other locals who claimed to have seen strange lights or heard mechanical noises echoing in the dark. Some dismissed such accounts as mere fanciful tales spun by overactive imaginations, while others treated them with the reverence of someone who knew there was truth hidden in the shadows. I often wondered about the nature of that encounter. Was the man a figment of our combined imagination? A hallucination born from the heady mix of isolation, adrenaline, and youthful daring? Or was he something more, a visitor from a realm where the boundaries of our known reality dissolved into the extraordinary? His cryptic farewell, "Todo bien, y'avais todo lo que quería ver," suggested a completeness, as if his purpose had been fulfilled by our meeting. And yet the mystery only deepened the more I thought about it. Now, at 27, I still find myself drawn back to the memories of that night. I return to Cajon del Mapo in my thoughts, to the cool embrace of the mud pools at Baños Morales, and to the lingering question of what truly happened under the shroud of darkness. The area remains a place of wonder and eerie beauty, where every so often I catch a glimpse of a shadow that makes my heart skip a beat, or hear a soft sound that reminds me of that unforgettable encounter. I have learned to live with the uncertainty, embracing it as a part of the vast, inexplicable mystery that is our universe. That night taught me that some experiences defy explanation, that there are moments when the ordinary collides with the extraordinary, leaving us forever changed. And though I may never fully understand what happened at Baños Morales, I carry that memory with me, a silent reminder that the world is full of secrets waiting to be discovered, just beyond the veil of our everyday perception. Redditor 6. I've never forgotten the story my Uncle Tong used to tell, a tale so bizarre and unsettling that even years later it sends shivers down my spine. It was one of those nights when the air was crisp and the sky stretched wide and clear, a perfect backdrop for the unexplainable. Uncle Tong, a grizzled man with a lifetime of rough edges etched into his weathered face, stepped outside for a smoke. I can still picture him, leaning against the peeling porch railing, his eyes squinting against the cold as he pulled a cigarette from a battered pack. That night, the world seemed to hold its breath. The distant hum of crickets was the only sound accompanying the rustle of the wind through the bare trees. Uncle Tong took a long drag, exhaling slowly as he surveyed the darkness above, but as he stared up at the star-pricked sky, something unusual caught his eye. A series of flashing lights, erratic and pulsating, dancing across the heavens in a pattern that defied nature's usual order. He paused mid-smoke, his weathered gaze fixed upward. With a wry, almost incredulous mutter escaping his lips, he said, "What the hell, this ain't weed or nothing." In that moment, he knew he wasn't tripping on any hallucinogen or the result of a drunken haze. This was something real. His eyes narrowed as the lights continued their erratic performance, glimmering and flickering in the inky black of night. Then, as suddenly as they had appeared, the lights zipped away, vanishing into the void as if they had never been there at all. Uncle Tong stood there for a long minute, the chill of the night seemingly intensifying as he processed what he had seen. His mind raced with a mix of disbelief and a peculiar kind of humor that only someone who'd seen too many oddities could muster. "Why didn't they abduct me?" he later recalled with a bitter chuckle. "Oh, fuck. They must have scanned my brain and thought this foo is too stupid. Let's go find someone else." There was a sharp edge to his words, a blend of self-deprecation and raw fear that hinted at something deeper than mere drunken bravado. That very night, after the inexplicable encounter with the unknown, Uncle Tong returned inside, his mind clearly racing. Later, over the soft clink of ice in his glass and the low murmur of a late-night radio, he recounted the incident to his daughter, Caitlin. "Make sure you study hard in school and be smart," he advised her with a wry smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "That way, when the UFOs come, they'll want to abduct you." Whether he was laughing or crying, or perhaps doing a little of both, I've never been entirely sure. His tone was laced with a dark humor that bordered on prophecy, as if he had seen something that none of us were meant to comprehend. I remember sitting there in the dim light of his living room, the sound of the old clock ticking in the background, as he recounted every detail. The cold bite of the night air, the unmistakable flash of lights that had not been the result of any earthly influence, and the lingering sense of being watched by something far beyond our understanding. His voice, rough and unpolished, carried an authenticity that no fabricated story ever could. Uncle Tong's account wasn't like the tall tales spun by folks who indulged in too much drink or too many hallucinogens. He was a man of the earth, rough around the edges yet grounded in a reality that had seen enough to know when something was off. That night, as he stepped outside for a simple smoke, he had unwittingly caught a glimpse of a secret world, a realm where the familiar rules of nature broke down, and something unexplainable slipped through the cracks. For days afterward, I could sense an eerie tension lingering in the air around him. The neighbors' dogs wouldn't bark after dusk, and even the wind seemed to whisper warnings in the dead of night. I often found myself staring out the window, half expecting to see a flash of light or hear that same mechanical, almost deliberate hum that had accompanied his fleeting encounter. Uncle Tong's story had a way of embedding itself in your mind, lingering like a half-remembered nightmare that you can't quite shake off. As the years have passed, I've tried to rationalize what happened that night. Was it a trick of the light, a strange atmospheric phenomenon amplified by the clarity of the rural sky? Or had my uncle, in his solitary moment of reflection outside, truly witnessed something that defied explanation? Sometimes, on nights when the sky is particularly clear, I find myself peering upward, searching for that familiar erratic glow. Yet, no matter how long I watch, nothing ever comes close to replicating the uncanny display that so profoundly marked my uncle's memory. I've come to understand that the universe is vast and full of mysteries that we have only begun to grasp. In our little corner of the world, where the mundane and the extraordinary intersect in the most unexpected ways, experiences like Uncle Tong's serve as a stark reminder that there is so much more out there than meets the eye. Whether it was a genuine brush with an otherworldly presence or a momentary lapse into a state of hyper-awareness fueled by a night of introspection, his words continue to resonate with me, a curious blend of humor, regret, and forewarning. Sometimes, when I'm alone in the quiet of the night and the wind is low enough to carry a whisper, I swear I can almost hear his voice, laced with both irony and a hint of terror. "Be smart, Caitlin. Learn, because when they come, they're looking for brains worth scanning." It's a statement that, even in its absurdity, holds a kernel of truth about the universe's strange and unfathomable nature. And I've always admired my uncle's ability to face the inexplicable with a kind of defiant humor, a way to shield himself from the raw fear that lurked beneath the surface. But as I've grown older, I've come to realize that his casual dismissal of that fateful encounter was also a way of coping with a reality that was far more complex and unsettling than he ever dared to admit. In a world where the line between what is real and what is imagined grows thinner with each passing day, his story remains a poignant reminder that sometimes the truth is stranger and scarier than fiction. Even now, when I catch a glimpse of a shooting star or see a strange glint in the night sky, I can't help but wonder if there's more to our existence than the simple routines of everyday life. There are moments when the air seems charged with a secret energy, when the silence of the night is broken by a sound that shouldn't be there. And in those moments, I think of my uncle and his wild, unexplainable encounter, a moment when the cosmos brushed past him, leaving behind a story that, despite all its absurdity, continues to haunt my thoughts. Maybe one day, I'll find the courage to step outside on a similarly quiet night, light a cigarette, and see if the universe has any more secrets left for me. Until then, I'll hold on to the memory of Uncle Tong's eerie words, a reminder that in the vast, mysterious tapestry of existence, we are all just tiny, imperfect parts of a story that is far greater than we can ever imagine. Redditor 7. I've never told anyone this before, but a week or two ago, while hiking alone in the sand dunes near my house in coastal California, I experienced something that has haunted my nights ever since. It was just past dusk, the sky a deep, bruised purple fading into black, and the dunes stretched out like silent waves beneath my feet. I had set out for a simple evening walk, hoping to clear my head after a long day at work. The air was cool, carrying the briny tang of the nearby ocean, and I could hear the distant murmur of waves colliding with the shore. I remember the sound clearly, a low, throbbing hum that seemed to vibrate through the ground itself. It was unlike any engine or natural phenomenon I had ever encountered. The noise had the deep resonance of a subwoofer pulsing in a steady rhythm, roughly every 5 seconds. At first I assumed it might be seismic testing or even a distant party with booming speakers. But there was nothing like that scheduled or audible on the horizon. There was a large surfing group reported to be 4 miles north, but even their revelry could not account for such a persistent, otherworldly bass that reverberated beneath my boots. As I wandered further into the dunes, the mundane details of my life slipped away, replaced by a growing sense of unease. I took a detour off the beaten path, drawn by the curious interplay of wind and sand. The plants here were sparse and scraggly, resilient species clinging to life in the harsh, shifting terrain. I knelt to examine a peculiar cluster of desert wildflowers, their petals glistening with a fine layer of dew, when a sudden gust of wind sent grains of sand dancing around me. I brushed them off, my mind still fixated on that strange, rhythmic noise echoing in the distance. Around 10:15 p.m., as the darkness deepened, I heard the unmistakable roar of a jet aircraft. It sliced through the night sky with the precision of modern machinery, its path a predictable line overhead. I looked up, watching it disappear into the west, perhaps bound for one of the many islands scattered across the Pacific. My thoughts briefly turned to the routine of travel, commercial flights, scheduled departures, nothing out of the ordinary. But then, as I followed the jet's trail with my eyes, I noticed another object moving above me. This second object was startlingly different. It was small, no more than a quarter of the length of the passenger jet I'd seen moments before. At first, I wondered if it might be some kind of drone or a peculiar helicopter, but its flight was erratic in a way that defied the laws of conventional aerodynamics. It hovered for a moment, then abruptly stopped mid-air, as if frozen in space. I stood, heart hammering in my chest, as the object seemed to dissolve into nothingness, only to reappear a few miles away almost instantaneously. It was as if it had teleported, moving with a speed and agility that no known aircraft could possess. The object's shape was equally bizarre. It had swept forward wings, yet its overall structure was oddly boxy. What made it even more unsettling was its transparency, an almost ghostly quality that rendered its internal structure indistinct. I squinted, trying to discern any detail, but it was as though I were looking through a pane of frosted glass. The outline of the craft flickered with a strange luminescence, reflecting the faint light of the stars overhead, while the rest of it remained shrouded in an eerie, shifting haze. I took a step back, and my throat tightened as I tried to process what I was witnessing. Every rational part of me wanted to dismiss it as a trick of the light or a misinterpretation of a conventional object seen from an odd angle. A helicopter, perhaps, distorted by the desert heat and my own fatigue. But deep down, an undeniable chill crept over me. My mind raced. Had I really just seen something that defied explanation? Was this a genuine UFO? Something that fell into that category without any extraterrestrial fanfare? I forced myself to take a steadying breath, trying to dismiss the wild theories that now crowded my thoughts. Time seemed to slow as I watched the strange craft. It hovered silently for what felt like an eternity, though in reality it was probably only seconds, its movements both graceful and disjointed. My heart pounded so loudly I was sure it would drown out every other sound. I could feel sweat beading on my forehead despite the cool night air, and my hands trembled as I fumbled for my phone to capture the inexplicable sight. The device, however, seemed to falter under the pressure of the moment, its screen displaying nothing more than static and a dim reflection of the dunes. In that moment, the normalcy of my evening shattered completely. I was no longer on a simple hike. I was caught in a scene that defied logic and invited a creeping dread into every fiber of my being. I tried to rationalize the experience, reminding myself that coastal California was no stranger to experimental aircraft and clandestine military tests. Yet, nothing I had read or heard before could account for the erratic, almost surreal behavior of the object overhead. The possibility that it might have been a malfunctioning drone or a misidentified helicopter danced in my mind, but even those explanations felt insufficient. I started to walk back towards the trail I had come from, my footsteps quickening as the object continued its erratic flight path above. The strange, subwoofer-like hum persisted, now intermingling with the sound of my own rapid breathing. I kept glancing upward, half expecting the craft to reappear in a different form, its translucent body shifting and shimmering in the starlight. Each time it did, my pulse surged anew, a mixture of adrenaline and raw, primal fear that I had not felt since childhood nightmares. I reached a ridge that overlooked the expansive dunes, where the ocean's distant roar mingled with the soft rustle of the desert wind. Here, I paused for a moment, leaning against a sun-worn rock, trying to steady my nerves and make sense of the impossible. The sky above was a vast canvas of indigo and midnight blue, and for a fleeting second, I felt an odd sense of calm, the kind that comes when one accepts the sheer, overwhelming mystery of the universe. But just as quickly, that calm was replaced by a prickling awareness that something was not right. I realized that I was alone, far from any source of conventional explanation or help. My phone had no signal, and the nearest town was miles away. In that isolation, every sound and every shadow took on an ominous quality. The object, whatever it was, had vanished for now, leaving behind an eerie silence that was almost as unnerving as its appearance. I considered calling someone, but the rational part of me argued that explaining such a bizarre encounter would only lead to ridicule. Instead, I scribbled a few hurried notes in a small notebook I carried, detailing the time, the location, and every sensory detail I could recall. As I began the slow trek back towards my car, the rhythmic hum returned intermittently, as if the strange presence was following me, watching me from the darkened sky. My mind reeled with questions that had no answers. What was that object? How had it moved with such impossible agility? And, most disturbingly, why had it chosen to reveal itself in that moment, when I was alone in the vast, indifferent wilderness of the dunes? Every step I took felt laden with the weight of unseen eyes. The dunes, once a place of serene beauty and natural wonder, now loomed like silent witnesses to an encounter that defied explanation. I kept my gaze fixed on the horizon, half expecting the craft to reappear and challenge my understanding of reality once more. The familiar landscape of coastal California had transformed before my eyes into a stage for a cosmic play, one in which I was both the unwilling audience and the sole witness. By the time I reached my car, my hands were shaking and my heart still pounded erratically. I sat in the driver's seat for several long minutes, staring out at the darkened dunes, trying to convince myself that it was all a trick of the light, an aberration of my tired mind. The hume had faded into the background, but its echo remained, a lingering reminder that not everything in this world can be explained by science or common sense. I drove home in silence, the image of that transparent, erratically moving craft seared into my memory. Even now, when I close my eyes, I can see its strange, boxy silhouette against the night sky, and I feel the same chill that ran down my spine in those final moments among the dunes. I don't claim to have all the answers. Far from it. I remain uncertain whether what I witnessed was a malfunctioning piece of military technology, an experimental aircraft, or something that defies all known categories. All I know is that it happened, and it has forever changed the way I see the world around me. The mundane details of everyday life, the rhythm of a workday, the familiarity of a well-trodden path, now lie beneath a layer of doubt, a haunting possibility that there are forces and phenomena out there that defy explanation. And on those quiet nights, when the coastal wind carries a faint subwoofer-like pulse and the stars seem to flicker with hidden secrets, I can't help but glance upward, wondering if that mysterious, transparent visitor will reappear to remind me that the universe is far more mysterious and terrifying than I ever imagined. Redditor 8. I've never told anyone this before, but that summer night still haunts me. I was in my early 20s, cruising down a lonely country block, a 1-mile stretch of 2-track dirt road winding through back roads, when my friend and I decided to escape the ordinary. The night was our canvas, warm, heavy with the scent of dry earth and weed smoke, and alive with the soft rustling of cornfields that bordered the road. We were idling along in first gear, our car a makeshift sanctuary as we passed a king-size joint back and forth, our conversation as hazy and unpredictable as the smoke swirling in the dashboard light. For the first half of our ride, nothing unusual happened. We saw a few deer silently darting across the road, and I even caught a glimpse of a meteor streaking across the velvety sky, a reminder of the universe's vast, indifferent beauty. The night was peaceful, almost too peaceful, until we turned back onto my road. That's when it happened. Out of nowhere, a light appeared to the north. It was smaller than the sun, yet it had an undeniable presence. The glow was a deep, rich orange, so intense it almost felt like molten lava suspended in the night sky. I remember the way it pulsed, not with the steady brightness of a bulb, but with a gentle, almost hypnotic radiance that seemed to breathe. My friend and I eased the car to a stop, our conversation faltering as we both stared in awe and disbelief. We exchanged wide-eyed looks and began to speculate wildly about what it could be. The possibilities ranged from a secret military craft to something otherworldly, though we were too stoned to care about earthly explanations. Before we could really dive into a coherent conversation, this same light suddenly shifted, flicking on in the sky to the south of us. This new light was closer, hovering only a few hundred feet above the tops of trees and no more than 1,000 yards away from where our car sat idling in neutral. As if on cue, 2 more lights materialized, joining it to form a perfect triangle. I sat there, heart pounding, as the triangle began a slow, deliberate rotation, like a weeble wobble or the mesmerizing patterns of a spirograph. The lights danced around one another, their colors shifting unpredictably, flashing in intervals that seemed almost random yet meticulously timed. In that surreal moment, I felt like I was witnessing something from a dream, a scene straight out of the alien abduction stories I'd read as a kid. Time itself felt distorted. I remember glancing at the clock, 10:24. The joint we'd been sharing lay forgotten on the passenger seat, its embers still glowing as if it were burning a hole through reality itself. The light show continued for what felt like a full minute, a minute that stretched into an eternity of both wonder and dread. It was as if the lights had chosen us, directing their otherworldly performance solely for our benefit, even though the road was empty, the houses nearby dark with sleep, and no other car in sight. Then, almost as abruptly as it had begun, the spectacle started to dissolve. My friend, who had been entranced by the display, suddenly snapped out of his trance and muttered, "What am I doing? I have a camera." He fumbled with his phone mount camera, eager to capture proof of what we'd witnessed. But by the time he managed to lift the lens cap, the triangle of lights had vanished completely. In its place, there remained one solitary light, a tiny, isolated orb that resembled a star more than a craft. It darted quickly in a looping pattern, performing a single, silent loop before disappearing into the night sky, leaving us with nothing but a sense of bafflement and a lingering chill. The only sound during all of this was the chorus of frogs and insects, punctuated by the distant, almost imperceptible hum of cars passing far away. The natural, nocturnal symphony felt painfully normal against the backdrop of the extraordinary event we had just witnessed. A stark reminder that the mundane and the mysterious can coexist in the same fleeting moment. I still remember that feeling, the way my heart hammered in my chest, how my palms grew clammy despite the cool night air. It wasn't just the fear of the unknown that gripped me, but also an overwhelming sense of insignificance in the face of something so vast and inexplicable. I tried to rationalize it afterward, telling myself that it might have been a trick of the light or some bizarre atmospheric anomaly, but deep down, I knew that what I saw defied any simple explanation. The next day at work, I couldn't help but recount the experience to my coworkers. I was mid-story, animatedly describing every detail, from the orange glow that reminded me of lava to the rotating triangle of lights. When our boss pulled up in his truck, he's a hard-ass guy, known for his no-nonsense attitude, and immediately he asked, "What's so important that you're postponing work for story time?" Without missing a beat, I said something offhand. "Oh, I was just telling the guys about the strange lights I saw over the fields last night." He stopped dead in his tracks and looked at me, his eyes narrowing with a mix of curiosity and disbelief. "What time?" he demanded suddenly, as if trying to verify the details. I glanced at my watch, still half dazed by the memory, and replied, "About 10:30. Then he leaned casually against a shovel leaning against the truck and began to tell the same story I had just shared. Apparently his son had a bad dream and woke him up. My boss had seen the lights out his window and picked up his son to watch them. The retelling of the incident in his gruff, matter-of-fact tone only added another layer of surrealism to the event, as if the phenomenon was not confined to our secluded stretch of dirt road, but was part of a broader, inexplicable tapestry woven into the fabric of the night. Even now, whenever I think back to that summer night, a shiver runs down my spine. The memory of those lights, their colors shifting, their movements so deliberate yet unexplainable, has a way of creeping into my thoughts at the most unexpected moments. It's like a recurring nightmare that I can't quite wake up from, a reminder that the universe is full of mysteries that our human minds can barely comprehend. Every time I close my eyes, I see that triangle of lights rotating against the dark sky, and I can still hear the faint, rhythmic pulse that echoed in the stillness of the back roads. In the days since, I have found myself unable to fully shake the experience. I often find myself looking out the window at night, half expecting to see that same eerie glow, or to hear the distant hum that first signaled the arrival of something extraordinary. The more I try to rationalize it, by attributing it to a secret military experiment or some optical illusion, the more I realize that the truth is far more unsettling. There are moments when the ordinary world seems to slip away, replaced by something inexplicably vast and enigmatic. I don't claim to have all the answers. In fact, I'm left with more questions than I ever had before. What exactly were those lights? Were they a natural phenomenon, a product of some yet-to-be-discovered atmospheric condition, or something else entirely? The possibility that we were being observed, even if just for a brief moment, is both thrilling and terrifying. And as much as I want to dismiss it as a quirk of the night, a product of our overactive imaginations fueled by weed and the magic of a starlit sky, I know deep down that it was real. To this day, the memory of that night remains etched in my mind. It is a vivid reminder that sometimes the universe has a way of intruding upon our mundane lives with moments of profound, inexplicable wonder. And even though I try to focus on the ordinary aspects of my life, the memory of those mysterious lights, the sense of awe and terror they invoked, continues to echo in my thoughts, leaving me with an enduring question: what else is out there, watching, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself?